The little impulse that I try to give in the morning, this morning, is called Universalizing Humanity's Religious Impulse. And I would say in one sense the religious impulse is already universal. At least it is ubiquitous, at least it's found everywhere. It's shared at some level by all human beings in no matter what distinctive forms. And we have progressive forms which serve the divine plan, and we have some pretty distorted forms which only obstruct unity. But that's one level of universality. But what's really, we're looking for a higher level, really. What's really behind this, the pervasiveness of this religious impulse? What's behind it? And I think, you know, there is in every human being, even though at a very unconscious level, some ever so distant memory of the of consciousness or awareness as it demonstrated in the highest spheres, from which we all long ago departed on our mission of redemption. Remember that? That was well, you know, maybe 22 million years ago, possibly, from one perspective, 21 million years ago, but from another perspective, the monad had to take all those permanent atoms and had to go through, you know, the stages we call in metallization, in vegetalization, in zoonation, very lovely words, you know, indicating the passage of the monad through the lesser kingdoms, and of course we're all involved in that in a sense. So long ago, you know, we started this mission of redemption, which deserves a lot of thought, I think. But for many, I would say it's now time for a reappropriation of that foundational realization which sent us forth as spirits into the lower worlds. Apparently it's a very sacrificial thing. Apparently we are, although we seem to forget it, lords of persevering, ceaseless persevering devotion. Devotion. You know, a lot of six-ray up there on the monadic level. So we have the religious impulse is really trying to get back to the monad, really. It's trying to get back to the spirit we are, because this aspect of our nature has somewhat forgotten those high impulses and states. But then again, we have to question ourselves, you know, what is, we talk about a universal religious impulse, but what is universality? What is universalization? You know, how can we approach an understanding of it? Because as we well know, we don't want to just use words and think we understand them simply because we use them a lot. You know how it is, you keep repeating something and pretty soon you've convinced yourself that it's true, whether it is or not. So what is suggested by this term universality? Well, first of all, as this term applies to human consciousness, the entire universe is not included. We don't actually mean that. Of course, we think about the universe, but when we talk about developing universality of consciousness, we don't mean we're always thinking of the entirety of cosmos. We don't mean that. From a practical point of view, interestingly enough, our solar system is often called the universe, and universal consciousness ultimately, I think, practically means solar systemic consciousness. At least we have to think in terms of a greater whole, that much. So as we persist with this development of universality of consciousness, we develop an attitude of, you know, it's easy to talk about, but not easy to do, all-inclusiveness, all-inclusiveness. And let's think about what that can mean. What does it mean to include? So because, you know, second-ray types on a second-ray planet in a second-ray solar system, we're always talking about inclusiveness. You know, and it's a tricky phrase, a tricky term, because inclusiveness, just like when DK talks about harmlessness, he says, well, it doesn't mean that you're always having happy, harmonious relations with everybody. It could mean very stern relations at times when you have to, you know, correct something. So what does it mean to include someone or something? What do we really do? And I think, well, we could think about that for a minute. Okay, now that you've thought about it, I can go on. It's the Aries method. I'm so sorry, but you know, compression, divine compression, one day. Anyway, perhaps inclusiveness. You know, let's say finding some divine value for every person or thing included. In other words, it's recognizing the divinity in all contents of consciousness. Maybe it's not the normal stage we go around in, but you know, when you're consciously thinking about inclusiveness, recognizing the divine value in all contents of, you know, and really when you look around it, from a philosophical point of view, everything that is perceived is a content of consciousness. It is at least that. It is at least that. So another thing about inclusiveness, it is a question of recognizing some place for that person or thing within the level of wholeness that we perceive. I'll repeat that. It's recognizing a place, an appropriate place, a meaningful, because we're dealing with the world of meaning, right? So some meaningful place for that person or thing within the level of wholeness that we perceive. And then we can begin to talk about inclusiveness. It is really a term that deserves meditation, because it's so important to all of us. Well, and also, when we think about universality or universalization, we have to develop an attitude of non-separativeness. That's the whole problem of the world today, and DK has told us about the great heresy of separativeness, and I hope to address that on Sunday morning. Well, let's pause to think about non-separativeness here. Again, years could be spent meditating on this point. So some essence has to be perceived in this state of non-separativeness. Some essence has to be perceived which unites apparently distinct and separative objects, which our customary mental perceptions deliver to our consciousness. You know, it's a world of parts and pieces if you just go by what the mind and brain show. So some essence which transcends and underlies and pervades all of these objectifications in our contents of consciousness has to be understood or recognized. Okay, well anyway, these, you know, I'm trying to deal with the factor of universalization. That can't be real. Okay, all right. Not on my clock. What do they say? Okay. So anyway, going on, an attitude of unity, a realization of unity and diversity. It's an Aquarian perception, or diversity and unity, no matter how great or unfamiliar may be that diversity. That's part of the universal state of consciousness. A realization of unity and diversity. That's the one in many. That's the great perception on the third ray, but it applies also to other rays. A realization that each flows into each, and all, you know, each into all and all into each. It's this question of the Neptunian flow. It's a Neptunian perception. So there comes a perception of what I would call seamlessness. You know, there are no seams. You know, when you sew, there's this joins to that, but there's no this joins to that. There's not a this and a that to join together. There is a seamlessness. The apparent delineations of form are negated in the consciousness by this type of perception. Then there is the, you know, really these are sort of theme and variations, what I'm saying here. There's the ability always to see the one, no matter how extensive may be the many. To see the one, no matter how extensive or diversified may be the many, and we tend to call this isolated unity. It is a first-rate perception, but okay, any one of us, we all have a monad, we all have a triad, and we can deal on any one of the three major rays if we wish. So isolated unity, and I think sometimes we get into that state where we think we may have isolated the whole in the midst of diversity. That's what it's all about. You isolate the whole, and you're not in a state of isolation. It's just that the whole is an ever-present perception which has been isolated in your consciousness despite variety. Isolated unity. I once made a mantra for myself. I was just trying to be inclusive. You know how it goes. So I had this mantra, and it's so simple. The mantra was all and everything. All and everything. It didn't allow me not to include a thing. I think I made it up at a nuclear power plant that I was having a tour through a nuclear power plant, and I suddenly realized, my God, everything. It has to be everything. And whenever I said that to myself, something lifted, a veil lifted perhaps, and I kind of got it for a little while about the non-separativeness of everything. So I think I was seeing the preeminence of the essentiality in all forms. And some of you, I've even memorized this, in the often vain attempt to become harmless. I memorized this thing about harmlessness. And let me read it. Harmlessness is the expression of the life of the man who realizes himself to be everywhere. This fit very well with my all and everything. Who lives consciously as a soul whose nature is love and whose method is inclusiveness, and for whom all forms are alike in that they veil and hide the light and are but externalizations of the one infinite being. I thought that's worthy of memorization. And the page, not listed. I tell every student, you better list your page, but unfortunately I was in a hurry. Okay, anyway, so I can see that the hangman is waiting for me here. So this is really universality, realizing yourself to be everywhere, to realize yourself as an externalization of the one infinite being, and that all things, no matter how terrible, no matter how disgusting, no matter how out of resonance and out of pattern with the divine intention, the essence is still there. It's an externalization of the one infinite being. You ever go around for a day and try to realize that? I mean, that's the thing, to sustain that realization. That doesn't mean that we don't make corrections in the form just because they're externalizations of the one infinite being. We have to make a lot of corrections in order to archetypalize the world, right? And that's where the unpleasantness comes in. Nobody likes to be corrected. We are rather attached to certain forms. Well, anyway, just the way the religious people are attached to certain forms. And they love them, and they're afraid to be without them. And we have the task of universalizing that whole perception. And people, I remember, what was it, Charlton Heston, it was something about the NRA and something about prying his gun loose from his cold, dead hands. Do you remember that thing? That's when I'll give up my gun, when they pry it loose from my cold, dead hands. Okay, that's attachment. But just to show you, that astrology works. He was a Libra. What do? Anyway, he had a lot of Scorpio. Okay, so he had a lot of Scorpio. Well, this talk is going out the window. But in summary, that's nice when you're thinking about it, I guess the question is, do we think in terms of, if we want to be universal in our consciousness, what are the wholes, W-H-O-L-E-S, in terms of which we think? When we go around during the day, in relation to what wholeness are we thinking? What ring past not magnetizes our thought? Is it the whole of the little self and its very microcosmic concerns? Is it our group? Our nation? Is it humanity as a whole? I mean, are we always thinking in terms of humanity? Okay, do we go beyond that in a more than theoretical way? Do we really think in terms of the planet? Maybe some spiritual ecologists do think that way in terms of the planet. And the astrologers, do we think in terms of the solar system? Is that our wholeness? Do we think actually, and here comes the term universal, the first level of universality? Do we think in terms of our solar system? Not much we can do about it, but you know, our technology has allowed us to go out there and to perceive what's happening on the sun and in other places. And do we think in terms of the solar system? And of course, beyond the signs, you know, our local cosmic logos and the one about whom naught may be said, and the, you know, and on it goes. But what wholeness do we carry with us in our consciousness? That's the thing. And I think if people who have this very natural urge to reunite with their spirit, which they are always anyway, and to carry that sense of suchness, of oneness, of essentiality, of pure being with them all the time, so there's no them to carry it, you know, that one thing all the time, that would be our objective. So I would say that we have a will to reunite with Source, a will to reunite with Source. That is paramount. That's the religious impulse. This is a shared impulse. We all have it, although most are unconscious of it. We need to be restored to our true spiritual state in the heavens without leaving the earth. And that's a dualistic factor, but it overcomes dualism in a way. You're not going to leave the three lower worlds, not for a long time, and even after you've taken the fourth initiation, you're not going to leave, you know, because the big job is being done here. So, but we have to carry this true spiritual perception of our essentialized identity as a spirit with us all the time, even as the Buddha did, even as the Christ did, doing the job right here in the world of illusion. So this urge to do that, even though it's extremely unconscious in most, is what we have to respect in everyone, even though the modes of reunion may seem to us separative and destructive. The impulse is correct. The means are often, let's put a nice word on it, uneducated, you know. So that's where our job comes in as educators. This is where our task comes in, to educate towards inclusiveness and universality. So this indispensable spirit impulse inherent in all human beings can be educated away from destructive separatism. You know, but just because, you know, we're all this one essence doesn't mean we accept every configuration which is meant to be an approximation to the archetype. We'll accept the approximations when they are true to the archetype, and meanwhile we have a lot of adjustments to make. But meanwhile we know we all live in the suchness, the oneness, the beingness, the essence. We know that, we carry that with us all the time. So let's first educate, 30 seconds, let's first educate ourselves in this way, and then all whom we can possibly, I'll say any questions after the end, yeah. Let us educate ourselves in this way, and then all people we can possibly educate. Let's make sure that we are walking around in this state of perception before we start to go off and educate the separative people of the world, you know, because I'm sure if we spend one day attentively within our psyche, we would find extreme strands of separation. So let us learn to think in holistic terms until it can be said of us that our soul-inspired thought life, is pervaded by the expanding power of universality. You know, I didn't say by universality, right? That's presumptuous. But I just want to say the expanding power of universality, our soul-infused minds are pervaded by the expanding power of universality. That's no small task, but if we ever want to truly universalize the religious impulse and see it working out as something which unites the world rather than divides it, that's what we have to do. I think we are equal to that task as long as we know what it is. And hopefully, now we do. Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Michael,
Yes.
we have time for some questions.
You have time for a question? I don't know what happened. Someone set the clock incorrectly. Oh my. Oh my. Okay.
Okay, sorry.
Are there any questions? Yes, but it has to be run over to her.
All right.
I'm not used to answering questions. Yes, BL. Yes.
Speaking of education, can you say a brief word about the Moriya Federation?
This would be the moment. Well, as you know, we have the Moriya Federation. Someone said to me, why is it the Moriya Federation when all it studies is decay? But we do study a little Master Moriya too. The point is, Master Moriya is the head of all schools, esoteric schools and organizations. That's what we're told about him. So in a way, I kind of conceive of this as under his protectorship. Now we have, it's the internet wing, you might say, of the University of the Seven Rays, and we have a 7-year program now, a 7-year program. I'm shooting for 9, but 7 is good too. And in the first part of the Moriya Federation's work, we have something we call the Great Quest course. And it's for people who are interested in esoteric psychology, maybe have a little less background in esotericism. And the study of the microcosm is what we particularly attend to. I think it's a lot of fun. It's a good course. It runs deep, but it doesn't kill you. Then comes, well, you have to be ready to put yourself into it. So after 2 years of the Great Quest, which I think, Leonie Hudson devised this course. I worked with her on it. I think it's good. And it brings people in who maybe don't have a whole lot of discretionary time in their very, very busy life, right? So they're working on the microcosm, they're working with the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and they're focusing on their knowledge of the rays, esoteric astrology, the chakras, things of that nature. And by the time they finish that course, they may be ready to go on to Quest Universal. We call it Quest Universal. And that's so far a 5-year course, and each year of it is dedicated to a different stratum of the energy system. Meaning the first year has kind of an etheric physical background. The second year, the emotional body. Third year, the mental body. Then a mental body and also soul, higher mind. Then we go into a kind of a Buddhic focus. And for those who huffing and puffing can make it, we have one so far, we enter the 5th year, the Atmic focus, the spiritual will. Meanwhile, the faculty of the school, who is very attentive to the students, I do hope, and at least they intend to be, and they are experienced students themselves. The faculty has its own years of study, which are 5 years, and I intend to push it, I hope, even to 7 years, starting next year. We study all those things that the students study. We are students too, but we want to bring this on to also the spirit level and even a more macrocosmic level. We have a rather complete application form, and the work is free of charge, of course, but we hope and expect donations from our students to help keep the work going. The faculty is very selfless in the giving of their time. And for them, it's an act of service as well. So every year we begin at the solstice, December solstice, just like Master DK said, because that solstice is the time for the kickoff of the new esoteric schools. We don't, for a minute, think that we are as rigorous as the new esoteric schools really will be. You've heard about that drastic entrance examination. We don't have that, If you have goodwill and are not totally deluded by glamour and think you're the princess of the universe or the king of the universe, you can get in, It's not a problem. Just as long as as long as you do your work. It's got a nice 7th ray to it. It's going in a fairly regular manner. We have our monthly meditation reports, and we have now our communication over webinars with special subjects and question and answer things. We're trying to use more of the interactive method we're developing, but now we've actually finished 5 years. And meanwhile, all this is being paralleled by the Christ College of Trans-Himalayan Wisdom, who is a meditative base for us. They make sure they do their meditations, and that supports the whole process. You know, that's in New Zealand, and that's right on the ground, one of the seed new esoteric schools. So we're having a good time with it. It's very exhausting, you know, but it's fun. We just push forward because it has to be done. It's not yet, you know, it's not yet one of the schools that DK said would be a new esoteric school. It's a bridging school, and we hope to bridge intelligently towards helping those that are coming back into incarnation who can bridge forward, and so when the Christ really returns to earth, you know, we're told when the great Lord walks the earth again, these schools will appear, and probably in California will be one of the first places. So that's one of the first ones, and maybe New Zealand will be one of the first ones. First the preparatory schools, and then come the advanced schools. 14 of them, and eventually in every country. So if you'd like to know more about it, participate in it, sign up, just come and see who are the faculty members here. All right, we are well represented. Take a look at these cheerful faces and go speak to them about your participation in the Moriya Federation. It is a good form of esoteric education, and it will put you through your paces if you are sincere. Okay. There.